Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Thursday, May 23rd, 2024. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. Again, we are taping this podcast on Wednesday night, May 22nd. So there may be some day confusions as we speak. Just please bear with us. We'll be back on our morning taping schedule next week. And by we, I mean executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Media commentary columnist Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
And Christine's colleague at the American Enterprise Institute, AEI's Director of Domestic Policy Studies, and our Washington commentary columnist, Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
I want to begin by reading two people from one of the oldest texts in the Western world, Psalm 94. This is the King James Version of Psalm 94. I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to tell you why I'm reading it. O Lord, to whom vengeance belongs, O Lord, to whom vengeance belongs, show thyself. Lift up thyself, thou judge of the earth. Render a reward to the proud. How long shall the wicked triumph? How long shall they utter and speak hard things, and all the workers of iniquity boast of themselves? They break in pieces thy people, O Lord, and afflict thine heritage. They slay the widow and the stranger and murder the fatherless. Yet they say, the Lord shall not see, neither shall the God of Jacob regard it. Understand the brutish among the people, and ye fools, when will ye be wise? He that planted the ear, shall he not hear? He that formed the eye, shall he not see? He that chastiseth the heathen, shall he not correct? He that teacheth man knowledge, shall he not know? The Lord knoweth the thoughts of man, that they are vanity. Blessed is the man whom thou chastenest, O Lord, and teachest him out of thy law, that thou mayest give him rest from the days of adversity, until the pit be digged for the wicked. For the Lord will not cast off his people, neither will he forsake his inheritance, but judgment shall return unto righteousness, and all the upright in heart shall follow it. Who will rise up for me against the evildoers, or who will stand up for me against the workers of iniquity? Unless the Lord had been my help, my soul had almost dwelt in silence. When I said, my foot slippeth, thy mercy, O Lord, held me up. In the multitude of my thoughts within me, thy comforts delight my soul. Shall the throne of iniquity have fellowship with thee, which frameth mischief by a law? They gather themselves together against the soul of the righteous, and condemn the innocent blood. But the Lord is my defense and my rock. My God is the rock of my refuge, and he shall bring upon them their own iniquity, and shall cut them off in their own wickedness. Yea, the Lord our God shall cut them off. I thought of this psalm. It is actually the psalm that is read today in the Jewish weekly liturgy, as today being Wednesday, I'm afraid, as we're taping. The psalm spoken on Wednesday mornings in the Shacharit service, because it precisely encapsulates the moment that we are at with Israel and Gaza and Hamas and the hostages and Rafah and the behavior of the international community. Every word here can be attributed or seen as a prophecy of the situation in which the hostages in Rafah and Israel itself finds itself, and the curses that are being advised to God to be placed on the wicked who are doing things are fascinatingly similar to the moment that we face. Who will rise up for me against the evildoers? Who will stand up for me against the workers of iniquity? Shall the throne of iniquity have fellowship with thee, which frameth mischief by a law? Frameth mischief by a law. Could that law be the decision of Spain, Norway, and whoever else that I can't, and Ireland,
Or the
in
ICC.
and
or the
Germany.
Yeah,
ICC
yeah,
and
yeah.
Germany in
That's the
recognizing.
line I wrote down actually as you said it. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So this psalm written 2,500 years ago, maybe, is a perfect encapsulation of the situation in which the Jews of Israel and the suffering hostages in the hands of the evildoers in Rafah face themselves. And the call here is not only for vengeance, though it begins with, O Lord, to whom vengeance belongeth, lift up thyself and render a reward to the proud. It says that the way to save the wicked is to punish them. The way that we can save the evildoers is not simply to punish them, but that the punishment itself should cause a change in the circumstances of their wickedness and lead to the good. So they gather themselves together against the soul of the righteous and condemn the innocent blood. But the Lord is my defense, and he shall bring upon them their own iniquity and shall cut them off in their own wickedness. Can we see in this the moral and spiritual justification for Israel moving into Rafah and taking out Hamas now that we have seen what we cannot unsee today, which is the video of the women being lined up after having been kidnapped on October 7th to be raped, to be turned into slave vassals of a totalitarian evil, destroying them solely because of their Jewishness. I do not ordinarily speak in prophets' tones. It was just the astonishing fact that I happened to be reading this morning at morning services, and its astounding appropriateness to the day seemed impossible to me not to bring this up on today's podcast, whether, of course, Jews and Christians alike accept the divine inspiration of the Psalms as part of Scripture. And so therefore, this is not Jewishly specific. It is, I guess, Judeo-Christianly specific. But there it is. I did not tell my fellow panelists here that this was how I was going to begin the podcast or discuss it. But if you have any thoughts that follow along the inspiration that led me to begin today with this, I'd love to hear them.
Well, my first thought, I mean, I share your sort of awe at the appropriateness of it in all the particulars. But that aside, my first thought is that Israel itself needs to be focused on avenging
Psalm
these
94.
evils.
Yeah.
Yes, precisely. And that I think is I don't want to say a difference, but that throws a sort of curveball into the situation here. When those who are seeking vengeance are unsure of themselves, that is a quite different situation. And there have been a lot of world events this week pertaining to Israel. John, you alluded to some of them. The recognition of invisible imaginary Palestinian state, the playing games with aid and the Egyptians' sort of shell game on a ceasefire, all of which could push, I think, the U.S., which has been staying Israel's hand here into a different place. But I'm not convinced that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to think of anything to say after your reading and peroration, John, because I think it captures the moment pretty well. Of course, King David writing the Psalms in Jerusalem, in Israel, thousands of years ago. Reminder that the Jewish people are the indigenous people of Israel, of the Holy Land. And also the lyricism of the King James Version, adding some kind of consolation, I think, to what is just really a horrible moment world historically, and especially for Israel and for the Jewish people. Maybe the place to pick up is on this news of the day of the recognition of Palestine by the three European countries, Norway, Ireland, and Spain. Others, Europeans, also think they're going to do it, but these are the three so far. Particular interest to me, having been reading, as I've mentioned, the history of World War One, is Ireland, which in World War One and World War Two, and now apparently in this conflict, siding with the enemies of the Jewish people. Not a very proud moment at the time for Ireland. But I think the second thing to say about the recognition is that it's a very typical European move, which is it's meaningless. It costs these countries nothing, and all it does is impose burdens on other people. And it also demonstrates an incredible moral equivalence and kind of descent into relativism, which apparently is the European calling card these days.
And to add, Germany announced that it would arrest Netanyahu if he ever set foot on German soil. So there even the ones who aren't recognizing Palestine as a state are amping up their rhetoric. I do want to add to what you said, John. I love the Psalms, and I think there are moments where when we all talk about stuff in policy terms or just war terms and all the ways that we've discussed this horrible conflict that's ongoing, you forget that actually words like vengeance are appropriate sometimes. And I think we get lost, and certainly our unfortunately our country's foreign policy team almost never speaks in these sorts of terms, and never, there's not enough moral weight behind most of what they have said thus far about Hamas, and particularly lately. But it is useful to hear this language and to hear it expressed without equivocation, without any sort of apologetics, without any both sidesism, as we like to say. I mean, I'm sure there was a version of that and back in King David's time, but we don't hear it here. And the clarity, the moral clarity of those words is what I find so necessary and bracing right now. And I hope that some of our listeners will pass that along to people who might be still in the equivocating stage of their approach to this conflict.
I think it's important to note that the psalm itself does not represent the balance between vengeance and justice as a zero-sum game. There
Right.
is an escape that it provides from the cycle when it says, "The Lord knoweth the thoughts of man, that they are vanity. Blessed is the man whom thou chastiseth, O Lord, and teachest him out of thy law, that thou mayest give him rest from the days of adversity until the pit be digged for the wicked." Meaning, you don't have to keep doing this. You do not have to continue to do evil. Listen and hearken to the words of the Lord. Learn from him about what is good. Change your ways, and the cycle that will lead to his vengeance will be interrupted. It is in your hands, our hands, to do this. And what we are seeing in the recognition of the fake Palestinian state and the behavior of the ICC is exactly the opposite. 8 months after the kidnapping, or 8.5 months after the kidnapping of the hostages, the murder spree at the Nova Festival and at the 3 kibbutzim, is a reward that is being granted for the evil. What is the recognition of a Palestinian state but a victory for Hamas in the war that Israel has not yet won? So there are different qualities of this war. There's the specific war to secure reestablish deterrence that Israel can have against Gaza as a staging ground for war. There is the elimination of an enemy force, right? But there is also this question of whether or not, away from the battlefield, world opinion and world leaders and world organizations and nations are going to grant the evildoers a victory that they will rue having granted, as it opens the Pandora's box of Pandora's boxes. You think it ends here, that a terrorist group stages this kind of monstrous assault and 8 months later gets some massive diplomatic victory? What is to prevent others from following along? What is to prevent the Basques from going full bore against the very people who just decided to recognize Palestine in Madrid? What is to prevent the IRA from reestablishing itself? What is to prevent the Baader Meinhof gang in Germany from reestablishing itself? You cannot allow terrorist groups to secure victories, even if they are in lands far away, because the message is universal, which is, do something unspeakable and we will cry uncle and we will give you what you want. What have we seen on college campuses? Exactly the same thing. And there's a reason I read this morning. I mean, I read this morning because my wife's beloved father died last Friday, and we are observing the mourning period known as Shiva. And so we are going through the morning prayer so that she can say the prayer for the dead, the Mourner's Kaddish. And this emerged from the daily liturgy as the Wednesday Psalm, you say. And on a day, the day of and after all of these iniquitous pieces of behavior against the Jewish people by people I think we can either say are evildoers, that's Hamas, or are the people who are encouraging and supporting the evil that they have done. And for the nightmarish, grotesque, poisonous, murderous cherry on top, the release of this video, which I strongly urge you not to watch if you can avoid watching it, and you are somebody who has no difficulty understanding the horrible situation that the hostages are in. It may be something that people need to see if they're still in some bizarre way questioning how bad the treatment is or how bad what happened on October 7th is. But for the rest of us who are not in that position, it is a horrifying grotesquerie beyond words, and no human being should not have to have experienced 1 millisecond of what they were forced to experience. And I don't think that we are doing them any credit or any help by participating in the humiliation that was done to them in this video that got released. But it is very suggestive of the seriousness of purpose here. And I want to yesterday, Seth, at the end of the podcast, said every answer that he can see to every problem here comes with 2 words, which is defeat Hamas. You want to rescue the hostages, you got to defeat Hamas. You want to change the circumstances on the ground, you got to defeat Hamas. You want to help the Palestinian people get fed, you got to defeat Hamas. You want to rebuild Gaza, you got to defeat Hamas. Defeating Hamas is the only answer. There is no other answer. And that is also the message of Psalm 94. And so it is meet and proper that is today's, homiletic, prophetic poem that we have been, that the sages placed on the calendar when this Siddur was written, for us to read it on this day, on this Wednesday, though you're hearing on a Thursday.
I'd add to it, although it's not a priority for me. If you want to recognize a future Palestinian state, defeat Hamas.
I mean, without question, because there will be no Palestinian state without defeating Hamas.
Well,
it may take 20 years, it may take 40 years.
Right. Yeah.
But Israel will not allow the creation of a Palestinian state. Whatever the UN says, and whatever Spain says, and whatever they say while they're pining for the fjords in the pointless country known as Norway. It's where horrible peace deals are struck that we are now dealing with 30 years later in the form of Hamas. Congratulations. There is no future for the Palestinians with Hamas present.
It's important to note the Biden administration is against the ICC request for warrants. Biden administration has said it won't unilaterally declare a Palestinian state, at least for now. But in all of the Biden administration's planning and messaging, they assume the defeat Hamas part. Everything is about the day after. That's what their goal is. The goal is not defeat Hamas. They take that as like a given. And their own focus is the day after. But by focusing on the day after, they ignore Hamas. And defeating Hamas is an end. And so then you have to think about what are the means we need to pursue to achieve that end. That's something that the Biden administration isn't doing. It's so glommed up on this question of what will happen after Hamas is defeated, and Hamas is not defeated. That's clear as day.
So our friend Michael Durand has an absolute corker of a piece in Tablet called The Gantz Ultimatum, published on May 20th, about Benny Gantz, one of the three members of the war cabinet in Israel. That's Benny Gantz, and the two men indicted by the ICC, or whose indictments was recommended by the prosecutor at the International Criminal Court. That, of course, is Prime Minister Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. Benny Gantz making a speech last week, or actually not last week, just a couple of days ago, announcing, as Matt was sort of alluding to, that there has to be a plan to how it's going to be in Gaza the day after Israel wins. And Gantz said in his speech, a small minority took over the bridge of the Israeli ship and is sailing it toward the wall of rocks. Gantz asserted, as Mike writes, as if he himself had not been present on the bridge throughout the war.
He's still on the bridge.
Gantz is one of the three people who is holding the rudder or the wheel or whatever nautical analogy you want to use, and is now saying it's Bibi's fault and there needs to be a plan to save Gaza after the war. And he is just as responsible as Bibi or Gallant or anybody else for designing that plan if he believes it is part of the overall war strategy. And yet he is trying to shoulder this burden on Bibi alone, and makes three demands, as Mike puts it: stop the war now, accept Hamas as a player in Gaza, and refrain from escalating against Hezbollah in order to deter it. He says these are the demands of the Biden administration, but they are implicitly being accepted by Gantz, who at the same time is advocating for going into Rafah while completely securing the release of the hostages, depending on what hour of the day it might be. And when you look at that and you think about that, you think about how impossibly complicated the situation is, how difficult it is to achieve the clarity of Psalm 90. None of us is a psalmist. No, none of us is King David. We should not expect Benny Gantz to be King David any more than we should expect anybody else to be King David. But clarity is necessary. And the clarity that began this war is Hamas attacked us. We must destroy Hamas. Whatever happens with the destruction of Hamas, the world and Israel will be better with it gone. And we will deal with how the world can reconstitute itself, or our neighborhood can reconstitute itself, once we have achieved our aim. The taking of the hostages instantly complicated that problem because of the moral requirements on Israel to ransom and secure the release of hostages from people who now understand the inexpressible value of those hostages in muddying and complicating the Israeli war aim. But push is coming to shove. There is no third way now. There is no negotiation with Hamas that is going to lead to the peaceful release of these hostages. You can't look at the last 6 weeks and see any path to it. American officials aren't even talking about it as though there is a path to it anymore, after the way that they were lied to by the Qataris and by the Egyptians, not by Israel, which has essentially been attempting to negotiate in America in the terms America wants for the last 6 weeks. How many? Fewer hostages, maybe some bodies, not live, not dead, but they're this and that.
So
They're
it's
trying to, yeah.
It's been a while since I've invoked my catchphrase, but I'm going to say it now in response to Matt's point about how the international community seems to be taking the Hamas will be gone step as a given in their idealization of a future Palestinian state. It is worse than that, because not only are they taking that as some sort of given, they are dead set against the only force that is working toward that end. The only force that is actually trying to get Hamas off the stage, out of the picture, is Israel and the IDF. And they are so the very people that are simultaneously preaching, proclaiming, declaring a Palestinian state are the ones that are dead set against Israel destroying Hamas.
Well, and Duran's piece makes another interesting point from the American domestic political context, which is that the whole "we need a plan for the day after" has been a Biden administration mantra for a while now, which distracts from the fact that that must be assumed in this case, and the way that they're behaving suggests so, which is that the Biden administration assumes Hamas will still be in Gaza. And that's just a given, rather than that it will be destroyed and that it will be eliminated, and that will allow for some sort of future rebuilding. And he quotes a senior administration official who told that to the Times of Israel, who said, "We have to be honest about the fact that Hamas will remain in Gaza in some form after the war is over." I don't think that is obvious. It shouldn't be obvious. Obviously, remnants of terrorist groups do remain in the territories that they had recently been ousted from, but to begin with that assumption is not the way you win a war.
Look, there were Japanese fighters
in Okinawa for 20 years.
living in the jungles for 20 years who didn't know the war was over.
They ate Biden's uncle.
That's why he's so sensitive to the continuing threat posed by stragglers. So are there stragglers? Yes. Will there be people who were Hamas fighters who will not be killed systematically by Israel until there's not a single one left standing? Yes. Will they play a political, organizational, paramilitary role? No. If Israel
they can go be tenure track professors. They can go be tenure track professors here in the U.S. because there'll be all those job openings for the Palestinians. So there we go.
Well put. So we have alluded to this before. It's a much deeper point than we can get into on this podcast or in a series of podcasts. It's maybe a magisterial book for somebody to write. But Israel went into this war with a very clear war aim, and it was the destruction of this one group. They're now being told that the destruction of this one group is impossible. Why are they being told that? They're being told that by wise minds, maybe, sadder but wiser minds, who have seen how America, since 1953, fights wars to no conclusion. And that this is what we, at our military establishment and our foreign policy establishment, sees as the end result of war is it doesn't really end in victory. After the most important victory in war ever won on the face of the earth in 1945, both in the Pacific and in the European theaters. We have lost that sense. Israel has not lost that sense. Israel won a war. It won a war in 2000. It won a war in 1967. It won a war in 1973. Both those wars had permanent positive consequences. 67 knocked the 22 Arab countries that were formerly at war with Israel and Egypt out, the 22 and Jordan out of the battle against Israel. The 1973 war knocked Egypt and Syria out of the existential war with Israel, and the 2003 conclusion of the Intifada and the construction of the security barrier between Israel and the West Bank knocked the PLO and Palestinian West Bank terrorism out as an enemy of Israel. Israel has won 3 major wars, and it can win a 4th. We don't win wars, and we don't understand how that can happen. And
not only
now, yeah, go ahead.
Not only do we not win wars, I think there's a more recent syndrome or debilitation that we suffer from, having to do with Iraq and Afghanistan, which is this: what's the end game? What's the end game syndrome? We get because yes, there was a dearth of post-war planning for Iraq, and Afghanistan, even though I think it was a great success in many ways until we withdrew, didn't look like a traditional victory, and so we are able to overlay our insecurities about those wars onto every conflict now and say, what's the end game? What's the off ramp? What's the exit strategy? What's the post-war plan? We were not in existential wars in the way that Israel is. When you are, you deal with the end game when the end game comes. You deal with the post-war when you get to the post-war. They need to get to the post-war. That is the first. That is the absolute first priority for them.
You also don't know what the order of battle and the geopolitical circumstances are if you win that war, what the day after looks like. By which I mean, just to give you an example, in 2003, when it was pretty clear that we had rolled up the Iraq War in the sense that the hostilities between the United States as a country and Iraq as a country had ended, and that the Iraqi regime had been obliterated. And meetings were held at the White House. And among other officials at the White House was Elliot Abrams, who is my brother-in-law. And George W. Bush had one very pressing concern that he directed toward Elliot. And he said, no famine. Okay, so great efforts were made to prevent a food crisis in Iraq, but there was no food crisis in Iraq. There was a fear that there would be a food crisis in Iraq, but there wasn't. That wasn't the problem. That was a problem that had been predicted in position papers and possibilities when they were talking about what the end game was going to be like. So, for example, in Gaza, it could be the case that the war ends and there's going to be 200 billion tons of food sitting there waiting to be distributed to the Gazans, who will basically be able to eat for 6 months and swim in flour and all of that, because those trucks have been held up for however long that they've been held up. You don't know what the circumstances are going to be with Hamas gone. You don't know what you need to deal with. The idea of making 10,000 different contingency plans sounds good if you think that you have an unlimited number of planners who have an unlimited number of abilities to see an unlimited number of options or end results, or you can deal with it as it comes, which is what sensible people do.
I do think you need to have security control over the territory that you are invading. That doesn't necessarily mean occupation. In the case of the Second Intifada that you mentioned, John, of course, there was the disengagement, the building of the security wall, but the IDF still has security control over most of the Judea and Samaria, right? They were going in just the other day in order to foil terror plots. And while there wasn't a famine in Iraq, there was an insurgency because we didn't have enough troops and because we didn't have the right strategy for the post-war period.
Right.
My fear is that Israel, because of United States pressure, doesn't have enough troops in Gaza and is wary of committing itself to a strategy where it does have security control over Gaza at the endpoint. In order to defeat Hamas, you need to be able to go into Gaza at any point to take out whatever Hamas cells emerge. I mean, Hamas is a wing of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is a massive global organization. So even if Hamas is defeated, as I pray it is, the Muslim Brotherhood's not going anywhere, right? I mean, they're gonna try to come back. It's a big group that wants to see Israel wiped off the face of the earth. So you have to have some idea of how do we maintain security control there? How many forces are required to actually achieve the goal of defeating Hamas? That, I think, are legitimate concerns. That's what the administration should be talking about instead of skipping to the day after, because I think that would be constructive for the Israelis, as opposed to what we're doing now, which is this kind of bizarre, incoherent attempt to continue the project of the last, started in 2009, however many years, 15 years, removing America from the Middle East and leaving the Middle East in the hands of some type of bilateral relationship between Saudi Arabia and Iran, whether that's they're balancing each other and so we don't have to worry about it, or whether there's somehow some type of agreement between Saudi and Iran that will maintain the peace. That's what Obama tried to do. Biden has restarted it. And it's not making Israel any safer. It's not making America any safer. It's not making the world any safer.
Christine, let me just propose this as a possibility. Israel is now being come at all sides with this effort to basically hand Hamas or the Palestinians or whatever a victory as a result of their attack. So Israel's damned if it does, and is damned if it doesn't. And there's all this talk about how Israel can't reoccupy Gaza. It shouldn't reoccupy Gaza. But Bibi Netanyahu told Jake Tapper on CNN that he had no interest in reoccupying Gaza. Israel was not going to reoccupy Gaza as it had since after its disengagement in 2005. Isn't some of this the net result of some of this to give Israel a free hand? I mean, if Israel is damned if it does and damned if it doesn't, then shouldn't it just do whatever it thinks it should do? Because it's never going to get the benefit of a fair shake or fair reading of its intentions and its purposes And the more the international organizations move against it, the more it needs to act on its own anyway. And there is precedent for this. In 1975, the UN declared that Zionism was racism. And in 1976, Israel rescued 103 hostages from a hangar at the Entebbe airport in total contravention of all standards of international law by essentially invading another country and going on its territory and acting and doing this and blah, blah, and saving them. And if it had been, and then in 1981 destroyed the Osirak nuclear reactor after it was condemned for annexing the Gaza Strip. Maybe it's better. Maybe Israel has a freer hand to do what it thinks is necessary when these instruments of international public opinion and pressure actually pull the trigger and do really nasty things against it. Because what's the point of trying to draw within the lines that the coloring book that they've printed?
Well,
they're going to say you violated the lines of the coloring book, and that they're going to tear your page out and put it in the garbage.
Yes, I mean they can do no right by the standards of these, and I use standards cynically and in sarcastic air quotes. The standards of these international bodies, but there's a difference when it comes to the United States. I think a lot of what's happening now is about Israel's relationship with the U.S. So, and what's interesting to me is that the domestic political audience in the U.S. looks at how the UN is behaving, as some of these European countries are behaving, and goes, what are they talking about? Like, why is Israel constantly singled out? I think it's something that people are paying a little more attention to. We know that this has been going on for decades. The UN in particular has just been egregiously focused on condemning Israel for things that it completely ignores when China, Iran, Russia, other countries do the exact same thing or worse, Syria. But what I would like to watch is again, political opinion here in the US, how it's going to shift or not with regard to our role as Israel's ally, because that is now among the Democratic Party. That is up for grabs in the Democratic Party. There are plenty, and just as I think for Republicans for decades, whether or not we should allow the UN to be, first of all, on our soil, and second of all, funded by us at the level it is funded, has long been a dispute. I would love to see that argument come to the fore again, given what happened with UNRWA, given what's happened with all of the conflict in Gaza. So in that sense, yes, there could be some silver linings that long-term come out of this conflict. But I think Israel has always not exactly ignored, but not been driven in its policymaking and its war making at all by these international bodies. But about us, and now that the Democratic Party in particular, and the Biden administration is moving closer to the norms of these international institutions, yeah, it's going to have to possibly make a similar break in terms of how it with respect to allies. And we see this in right. Look, our friend Liel has been arguing for a long time that Israel needs to put some space between itself and the U.S. as an ally, that actually would long-term be better for Israel's future. So these arguments have been made, but they might be coming to the fore more now.
Abe, just a data point on what Christine's saying about American public opinion. You don't want to overread results in an off-center primary in a distant state with a lot of different stuff going on, but there were interesting results in the Oregon primary last night in the Democratic Party, where Pramila Jayapal, one of the leaders of the squad, her sister was defeated in the primary by for a state legislative seat, I believe, was defeated. And Israel was a major factor in that race, oddly enough, for a state legislative seat in Oregon. There were a couple of other such examples. State Rep Maxine Dexter declared the Democratic primary winner by the Oregonian.
Yeah, it was a congressional
seat. Winner. Excuse me, it's a congressional seat, so it's a much bigger matter. I'm sorry, I'm off on my confusion here. So Israel played a role in this race, and the non-anti-Israel candidate won in a woke state.
It's playing a
So
race in the playing a factor in the Jamal Bowman race as well. Yeah, there are a couple of
right,
races
which
actually.
yeah, we're not going to have those results until the end of June, as Matt helpfully reminded me the other day when I thought that they were happening this week. So I
Time
think
is a
that
flat circle, John.
thank you very much, and I do think that there are data points and the continuing fact that when you poll Americans, no matter where the poll comes out and the support levels seem very high for Israel or shockingly low, like they can look like they're 80% or they can look like they're 40%, depending on how questions are asked. Support for the Palestinian cause, however you want to slice it, is half the support for Israel. And the support for Hamas is at 1 or 2%. So the actual support for its rival Hamas or its enemy Hamas among the American people is as low as support can be. And that is now 8.5 months into the war and all the protests.
I think there's an interesting sliver of hope in a certain aspect of the anti-Israel fever, which is that if you are somewhere in that camp, especially if you're devoted to it, you kind of assert and live in an alternate reality. You believe that the ICC is a real court with enforcement powers that adjudicates global matters. You believe that by declaring the existence of an imaginary Palestinian state, there is a Palestinian state. And you believe that a great many more people are on your side than are on your side. And I think that's helpful in thinking about this, because the vehement anti-Israel forces are really not dealing in reality, in shared reality to that extent. And they have to come up against actual reality in things like elections and in public opinion. And they are so deluded that they can fool themselves into ignoring it until it is in some sense too late for them. On the other hand, they have a way of impacting actual reality, and that is the scary part. Right. Not least of all in their ability to affect White House policy and White House posture and elite
opinion
and elite opinion.
Yeah.
Yes, but they do not, no matter how certain they are in their numbers, and they're wrong in their understanding of their numbers, they do not represent the average American, and they do not represent public opinion.
And I wonder how much worse that's going to get as the year passes, because as we keep saying, there are 2 political conventions coming, and Pache, everybody who has a kid who has finally finished this semester of horror at a college campus, but Labor Day is going to roll around and it's all going to start again. Does anybody really doubt that it's not all going to start again unless somehow Israel miraculously beats Hamas and Rafah in the next 2.5 weeks and things move on and Taylor Swift marries Travis Kelce and other important things happen on the planet to derail this as the number one topic? I think not, and I suspect that what we saw here in the spring is going to be replicated as early autumn begins, and then that, of course, has a direct impact on every election in the United States that is contested, from the presidency down to every Senate seat that might be within 4 or 5 points of each other, and any House seat that is within. And there are, remember, thousands of state legislative and local seats. And we have seen in the last decade the ability of parties to lose thousands of lower level seats in electoral tides. And I don't think that electoral tide is going in the anti-Republican, anti-Trump direction. It may well be that it doesn't happen at all. All the indications right now are that if you were going to bet on an electoral tide, you would bet on the party that has a leader whose last three polls have had his approval rating under 40, and in which, at least in two polls this week, have the generic ballot. That is, when you're asked, would you vote for a Republican or a Democrat in a primary, in a general election? The streams have crossed. Republicans are now up in at least one poll, 42-40 on the generic ballot. If Republicans are up on the generic ballot and Trump is leading in the election, he can still blow it. They can still blow it. That's what happened in 2022, I guess. But you can't look at it and think it's going the other way, that Democrats are on the verge of some kind of historic moment in which their priors are confirmed. And all of that disorder, all of that chaos, all that stuff that, as Abe, you point out, does not reflect the reality of the opinion of the American people writ large. That's all going to be happening as people start early voting. And as and that, when does that begin? Like September 15th? I mean, people are coming back to college campuses last week of August, first week of September after Labor Day, and they're starting to vote, and campuses blow up. I don't know. I just think it can't be good for Biden, and in that sense, it would also be good for, even though they can impact reality, confuse Biden and confuse the media and have a new spate of horrible anti-Israel stories.
Well, remember that of the campers who were actually students, the tents were a great way to get out of exams. So they might wait to spring up until later in the term this year.
Yeah, I mean, they're getting to school. They have to figure out how to use their meal plans that they can then complain they're not being allowed to use when they're
to figure out where to put
enjoy
the
their amnesty for their previous year's crimes and bad behavior. Yes.
Yeah. Do we have anything we want to talk about what happened today at the Hudson Institute, where Nikki Haley, getting a fifth of the Republican vote across the country, has basically now endorsed Donald Trump's bid for the presidency?
It's a pretty lukewarm endorsement. I mean, she said, I will vote for him because Biden's terrible. But I stand by what I said in whatever her exit interview when she suspended her campaign. So it wasn't an enthusiastic endorsement by any means.
She's with Bill Barr, unlike Mike Pence, who will not be voting for Trump. I believe he said that publicly. So I think Haley had to make this move in order to preserve a future in the Republican Party, potential future in the Trump administration, if not as vice president. It was lukewarm, and the Never Trump community is set at this. But there's the way we want the world to be, and there's the way the world is, and
then there's the way politicians behave. We shouldn't shock any of those guys.
The way the world is. The way the world is, this is Donald Trump's party. He's taken over the party. It's the Trump party, and he's ahead. He's on his. This is his election to lose. So if you're a Republican politician who wants to have a future in politics, you're going to say that you'll vote for him.
I think you have to give, if you don't want this to happen with somebody like Nikki Haley, and I'm sad it happened, because I don't know how you run a candidacy like hers and then say, never mind. I basically was running against him to say that he's a terrible threat to our country and to the future.
Well, that's not what she never said that, though. Okay. This was, I think among the Never Trump people, there's like this imagination They were attacking her at the time about how she was trying to have it both ways. She was criticizing Trump on some policy issues while also never really going after him directly, talking about the chaos stuff. Chaos follows him wherever he goes. Like always, the deeper you get into the primary, the more desperate you become, the sharper the attacks become. But she's not Liz Cheney. She's never been Liz Cheney. And now a lot of people are holding Nikki Haley to the Cheney standard. I mean, that's I think an absurd standard to apply to Nikki Haley.
I think somebody like Nikki Haley needs an off-ramp that she probably doesn't want to take and that they don't want to offer her, which is to say, she can't just grow in office by saying, I won't vote for Trump. Like, does she want to be head of Brookings? I mean, like, that's how you did it. That's how you used to do it, is somebody did the thing where they said, I can no longer in conscience support the party that would do X, Y, or Z.
Yeah. Well,
and then they get a something in the Cracker Jack box. They get, and it's not like the lousy, just like thing you draw on your arm. It's like the little comic book, which is the thing that you really wanted. And there's nothing for her, though. I don't think she wants any of that.
Well, now she has a fellowship at the Hudson Institute.
Well, there you go.
She made her comments.
Yeah,
that's where that was the platform, and she gave a talk prior to her admission that she will be voting for Trump. Haley gave a talk where she advocated for strength in American foreign policy, American global leadership, and this is another reminder of how we're just kind of setting ourselves up for a replay of the years between 2017 and 2021, where, Nikki Haley's going to vote for Trump. Now, will she be a surrogate on the campaign trail? Will she speak at the convention? These questions are up in the air. But she's still in the tent. Is she close to the throne? No. I think he's given every indication he doesn't really want her to be that close to the throne. But she's still in the tent, which means she's going to join the chorus of Republicans like Speaker Johnson, who are still supporting American leadership, who are still supporting aid to Ukraine, and who are going to be trying to convince Trump, if Trump is elected president, to go their way. Well, figures like J.D. Vance and Josh Hawley are trying to convince Trump to go the other way. And that's what we lived through for 4 years. It drove everyone in Washington insane, as we were saying the other day. And that's what we're going to go through again. And there you are. Good evening to you all.
Look, if that's the way politics has to be conducted, this is the way the American people have set the stage for politics to be conducted, as a kind of odd internecine warfare inside parties that look nominally unified. I mean, the Democratic Party looks nominally unified, and then when push comes to shove, there's all this. It's like opening, the lid of the picnic basket, and the answer.
Well, you look at AOC versus Richie Torres. Their districts are right next to each other. Hey, could it be more different?
Right. So this is life as we live it, and Trump's inconstancy and Biden's inconstancy, for that matter, create the conditions for a kind of series of internal civil political wars inside factions and coalitions. Now, there isn't much in the way of a coalition of the Republican Party, but what there are is ideas that are workable and not workable. are the ideas of the new industrial policy folks that you kind of cite, not about Ukraine, but about tariffs and trade and all of that. Do they have Trump's heart? Should Trump
because
win?
He's all over the place,
right? So we don't know how
it's not even clear they have his heart on Ukraine either,
right?
Right. Give him one meeting with the Polish president, and he'll be like, "Yeah, let's give the Ukrainians more weapons. We're not strong enough." So
this is it may well be that once again we had this fight in 2017. Should people who disagree with Trump go into the administration as a service to America to try to push and advocate for things inside and do the best that they can as patriots to make sure that the world isn't simply dominated by Trump MAGA partisans, right? And I think that argument, and now we're going to have it, but it's not necessarily going to be about who's inside.
It's a different argument now. Haley's saying that she's going to vote for Trump is a sign that the party is consolidating.
Right.
At this point in 2016, I believe the first letter of national security professionals saying that they would never work for Donald Trump had already been released.
Right.
I have not seen a similar letter this time.
Right.
People,
and I think,
people I think people want to find ways that they can influence the administration if it comes down. The opposition will say, oh, that's just craven and, you're selling your soul for pottage or whatever. But it's an instructive shift, I think, from 16 to 24. And then the other thing I'd point out about Nikki's comment is, for months now, as the Haley candidacy has continued to get 20% of the vote in primaries where, she's not an active candidate, people have been wondering, well, what would the Nikki voter do in the fall? And there was some data that I had cited on the podcast from a Liberal Patriot survey, I believe, that showed that, not a majority, but most of the Haley voters would just go for Trump. And, well, so will Haley.
Yeah.
So I think we kind of know where a lot of those Haley voters will end up in November, especially if the Biden administration continues on the current path.
I think it's also fair to say that what we are seeing here, if you pull back and you don't judge, if you want to analyze but not judge, even though we don't have a verdict yet in New York, and maybe that will slow or halt us down if the verdict goes against Trump. After the sort of turn against Israel 2 weeks ago, and the solidifying of Trump's polling, and various other things, there seems to have been a moment in which a whole bunch of people are like, all right, that's it. I wanted to stay on the sidelines. I can't stay on the sidelines anymore. I don't want Trump, but I don't want Biden worse. I'm going to hold my nose and vote for Trump. If he needs money, I guess I'm going to hold my nose and give him some money. I just can't take this anymore. And they are ballasted by the fact that the poll numbers suggest that that's not politically an unreasonable stance, right? You can't look at the poll numbers and say it's a risky bet to bet on Trump. It's not a risky bet. It could go the other way, but it ain't a risky bet anymore. And it might be a risky bet on the other side. And so might as well get your nose under the tent a little bit, not because you want anything from Trump, because a lot of people don't want anything from Trump or would be afraid of getting too close in proximity to Trump. But maybe you want your opinion to be an opinion that, amplified by 100,000 other people like you, is something that Trump is going to take seriously because there is a lot of force behind it, which is the case to be made for holding your nose and voting for somebody that you can't stand, is that maybe you can have an influence on him, even though you don't like him and he doesn't like you. I mean, and you mentioned the other day the Nixon victory in 1972. Nixon won the largest landslide in American history, and nobody liked him. They weren't voting for him. They weren't voting because they thought he was a great guy or a wonderful guy, or they liked him. They didn't like him. They thought he was a serious person. They thought he was an extraordinarily serious person and a capable person, and a person of strength, and a person of guts in some ways, and a tough person. But ain't nobody liked the guy for many years. And so, that's also not a necessary component of winning an election, despite how much people think it really is it really is important who you would want to have a beer with. When push comes to shove and you have two personalities, one of them is Biden and one of them is Trump, and neither one is likable, it's another quality other than likability that is going to be the thing that pushes you into the polling booth. Matt, you have today's commentary recommends.
Yes, thank you, John. This week I read the new book by Salman Rushdie, Knife, and I'd like to recommend the book. It's a short book. It describes the attack that he suffered while speaking at the Chautauqua Forum in August of 2022. A American-born Islamic radical decided to take direct action following the fatwa that the Ayatollah Khomeini had issued against Rushdie back in 1988, I believe, and almost killed Salman Rushdie on stage in New York. And in Knife, Rushdie describes the attack. Then the bulk of the book, and it's not a very long book, which is one of the nice things about it, but the bulk of the narrative is a description of Rushdie's recovery, what he had, how he lived through this really vicious assault, what got him through it. It ends up being something of a love story. It turns out that Rushdie had married his fifth wife shortly before the attack, and she was just a great source of support to him. And so that's quite moving. It's a reminder of the dangers, not just of Islamic radicalism, but also of the Iranian regime. And Rushdie, to his credit, in a recent interview with a German publication, went out of his way to say that a Palestinian state would be controlled by Hamas and would be a proxy of Iran. And why on earth would the progressive left want to support a theocratic, genocidal organization like Hamas and like the mullahs? There are some kind of, Rushdie is very much a man of the left. And so there are kind of annoying asides where he demonstrates his, I would say, superficial knowledge of American politics and kind of standard Upper East Side views on politics. But if you can just kind of, avert your eyes from the page for a sentence or two here and there, what you get is a really, in some ways moving, especially the love story, tale of the threat that every civilized person faces, and in Rushdie's case, has faced. He had thought that part of his life was behind him, and he says one of the worst aspects of the attack was that he felt himself pulled back into the years where he was a man in hiding, a man with 24-hour security, and that it won't go away. It just won't go away. It's always there, just as it showed itself on October 7th. And so Knife is a good reminder of all that.
He said that he's argued for a Palestinian state for most of my life since the 1980s. Probably right now, if there was a Palestinian state, it would be run by Hamas. That would make it a Taliban-like state, and it would be a client state of Iran. You're struck by the fact that he has, found himself thrown back into the world of the fatwa declared against him by the Shiite mullahs as a result of the publication of his novel, Satanic Verses, in 1989. I'm struck by the fact that he was the author of what is arguably the most celebrated anti-colonialist novel of the 20th century, Midnight's Children, published in 1978, which is a book about the moment at which the British pulled out of India. India and Pakistan split into two countries and then launched a war against each other. And all of the sins and crimes of the subsequent war and the troubles of the nascent Indian and Pakistani nations are the result of the perfidious evil of the British colonialists. And in so saying, what he has said about Hamas and the Taliban and Palestine, he, however his leftism might be striking him, has now become a supporter of a state that he himself 40 years ago, had this language been in use at the time, would have called a white settler colonial state. That is Israel. This is a very large intellectual moment for the world of progressive literature. Let's say Rushdie took magical realism from Latin America, brought into it fashionable anti-imperialist politics from sort of European thinking, merged them together, created this new hybrid, became one of the most important writers in the world, and is implicitly disavowing the ideas that made him famous. Very implicitly. And I'm sure he would say that they were appropriate for the moment and true in the moment that he wrote them. It's still a very big moment. He hasn't turned himself into Michel Houellebecq, but give him time. Who knows what he'll write next?
Well, I mean, I don't want to sound too harsh because I'm something of a Rushdie fan, and I saw that recent interview in which he said what he said about the Palestinians and Hamas and similarities to the Taliban, and he said something like, "So, why on earth would Western leftists want a state like this? Is this the kind of state that they want?" And the answer is yes. So
but that's the next step. That's the
right,
step toward
exactly
Houellebecq,
right.
is when he says,
my
yes,
rejoinder
that is what they want.
My answer to Rushdie, but what I would say about Rushdie is he has a very clear sense of the Islamist world and still a quite poor sense of the Western left.
Right. Well, you have to give people time to grow.
Absolutely.
But you don't need a lot of time to read Knife. And that's why I recommend it. You can get through it in a couple of days.
Short, fantastic.
Matt, I have a question about it because I saw one interview that he gave when the book came out. He had a sort of precognitive dream about his getting stabbed 2 nights before he was.
Yes, he was
stage.
in an arena.
Does he mention that in the book?
Oh, yeah. Well, there's a lot of foreshadowing, and all of his literary tricks are in use. I think the weakest part of the book is a few pages where he tries to have a imaginary conversation with the assailant, who he does not name. He just refers to as A. And it doesn't really come across. But as I said, the real gist of the book is the recovery. And it's actually just remarkable. I mean, as one of his surgeons told him, and he has that wit, so he starts referring to them as like Dr. Heart, Dr. Eye, Dr. Hand, for all the different parts of the body they specialize in. And I think Dr. Heart tells him, it's a miracle you survived.
Christine, you are the one among us who I believe was actually spoken on the very same stage.
Yes, the year before the attack, actually.
Oh, I have too.
That he was, have you?
Well.
Oh, well,
yeah.
both the two of you, excuse me. Excuse me, members of the Chautauqua Institution.
Oh, no, I was not at Chautauqua. I moderated a panel with Salman.
Well, I was on MSNBC with Salman.
There you go.
We
That's
are
why
both
I refer to him by his first name.
Was
I
on the
very your point, John.
Christine was on the very stage at the Chautauqua Institution.
Yeah.
Yes.
That Rushdie spoke from.
There you
and
go.
From which can you imagine what it might have been like to be standing there and have someone rush up the aisle and jump up on the stage go at you with a knife?
That's horrifying because it's a big stage. It's a big event space, but it's completely open. I mean, there's no, it's out. It's sort of covered, but it's an outdoor amphitheater, And there's no security at these things. I mean, this is a
Now
place
there
where
is.
every summer they would bring all kinds of people in. That's the whole point of Chautauqua. The whole ethos is, people come and stay. They have these little houses all over. It's like a whole campus on the lake. I mean, it's beautiful. And it's all about the life of the mind and the arts, and very family friendly. So no, that part of the horror of it is that it happened at a place where you would least expect something like that to occur. So yeah,
And in some ways,
terrible.
a kind of ideal as a symbolic matter that
Mhm.
Chautauqua, which is a late 19th century America, was an American craze, not unlike
Right.
the TED Talk or something, where they traveled around the country providing free inquiry, speeches representing free inquiry, and high level discussions to educate ordinary Americans in the best thinking of the day. That this effort would be made to murder a person whose entire life has been shadowed by the fact that he attempted to say uncomfortable things about the religion of his birth is a very striking reminder to the Western liberals who are sort of the ideal
And
audience for
yes,
something like Chautauqua, that they are
which is
under as
also
much
quite
risk.
religious, I should say,
Oh yeah,
ecumenically so. But it is like a rabbi would give a prayer one day, and the next day it's a Methodist minister, and the day after. So it's
right.
actually quite there's a
Yeah,
very strong religious
yeah,
tone to a lot of the speakers and events there. So
yeah. But it's just a reminder that they're coming after everybody, and they're particularly coming after everybody who says anything that is thought to be unorthodox or unpleasant to them or something like that. And all bets are off, and all murders are acceptable, and all death is a forward-looking thing. And that brings us back, of course, to Psalm 94, which I commend to everybody's attention. It's worth telling others about and studying today at your leisure, as the Psalms are any day, but this one in particular. So for Abe, Matt, and Christine, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.